Hello, good evening, and welcome to our ECHA Zoom talk this evening. As you know, or probably know, we have Zoom talks and Zoom speakers every month, and we've got some excellent guests this evening I'll introduce shortly. We have speakers lined up for the whole of this year, the end of this year, and I think we have about nine lined up for next year as well. So if that isn't already on the website, it will be when those things are finalized as well. So tonight, I'd like to introduce three wonderful speakers and scholars and writers. So our theme this evening is Queen Mary and her cultural depictions. So we're going to learn quite a lot about it over the next 30, 40 minutes or so. If you'd like to put your questions into the box, you'll see there is a chat box, probably at the bottom of your screen, or it could possibly be at the top. And if you can put something into that, that would be great. And then we could put some questions to the speakers towards the end of the session. So I'm going to introduce our three speakers this evening. First of all, in no particular order, that's just the order I wrote them down in, Rosamund Gravelle. She is a playwright, a producer, and a poet. She has a play called Three Queens, and it's played at the Barons Court Theatre. It's also currently, at the moment, playing in a theatre in America. I don't know whether she's going to mention that at all, but it is a little plug for it there. She's written plays at various theatres. She's written poetry, poetry anthology, done podcasts, and all round very, very talented person. Our next speaker is Dr. Peter Stiffell, and Peter is known to us. Peter has done a talk for us in the past. I think it was when he was in the process of doing his PhD at Kent. That must be perhaps 2 years ago, roughly around about that time. And Peter is an expert on the iconography of Queen Mary. So his PhD was University of Kent, and I think it was called Maiden Matriarch Majesty, the Iconography of Queen Mary the First. Please correct me, Peter, if that's not correct. So he's interested in material culture and iconography, imagery around that queen, and possibly other queens and royal people as well, involving portraiture, legal images, seals, coinage, and basically anything that's a visual, really. Our third speaker this evening is Dr. Johanna Strong, and Dr. Johanna Strong has done a talk for us before on Queen Mary. She's an expert on Queen Mary. She's an independent scholar. Her PhD was at the University of Winchester on the legacy of Queen Mary the First, and she's talked to us before about the legacy of Queen Mary, Mary the First before. She's done all sorts of things, such as podcasts, uh, Tudor Fora, History Open Days, things at Winchester Cathedral, advisor to Lucy Worsley on the programme about Queen Mary the First, which I think was shown in January, which I think, as I told her earlier, is excellent, actually, a very good programme. And I would like to meet Lucy actually sometime, so somebody can arrange that. And she's written a chapter of a book with Valerie Schutt and Jessica Hauer. Valerie's done a talk for us before, I believe. I'm pretty sure she has. And she's also writing a monologue as well. And she's a talented teacher, I believe. So those are our three speakers this evening. So over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you. If only it actually was as grand as advising Lucy Worsley. It sounds so much better than it was.
But it's good at dinner parties.
That's true. That is true. All right. Fantastic. So thank you, Tim, so much for the invitation and to the ECHA for having us. I know we're very excited about this. And thank you, of course, to everyone who is in the room virtually with us. So we have, hopefully, as people are aware, quite a dominant narrative that tells us that Mary is bloody, that she was a weak queen who did whatever her husband wanted. that she was hysterical and desperate for children, that she achieved nothing except religious persecution, that she was doomed to fail because she was a woman, because she was a Catholic woman. But all of that actually comes from interpretations created after her death. They come from Elizabeth I's reign, when England being Protestant wasn't a given. They come from James VI and I's reign and fears of a marriage between Prince Charles, the future Charles I, and the Spanish Catholic Infanta Maria. They come from Charles I's reign and his marriage to the French Catholic Henrietta Maria. In fact, the first reference to Mary being Bloody Mary isn't actually until the 1650s. Prior to that, the term had been applied more generally to her reign, but this was done mostly by Protestant authors who had pre-existing issues with her. The Mary that history traditionally shows us is a Mary that has been redesigned, re-understood, and rewritten by subsequent regimes, not because of who Mary actually was, but because of who those regimes needed her to be in order to legitimize themselves. That's where my research comes in. I wanted to know how we got from this allegedly bloody Mary of the historical narrative to historians in recent decades, some among us now, uh, who have argued that we need to reevaluate that and that we need to challenge that narrative. And what I found was that Mary's legacy is very much shaped by factors out of her control and that certainly come after her death. In Elizabeth I's reign, Catholicism seemed to be a massive threat to Elizabeth's place on the throne. This environment made Elizabeth and her counselors worry about their stability. And in order to limit the threat that Catholicism seemed to present, they had to present Catholicism, and by extension, England's Catholic Queen Mary, as an anomaly, a one-off that was a detriment to the country. This is when we have the publication of histories such as John Fox's Acts and Monuments, better known as his Book of Martyrs. It tells the history of the persecution of Christians from the beginning of Christianity, but it talks more about Mary's 5 years on the throne than it does the other 1,500 years of Christianity combined. It presents in gruesome detail the lives and deaths of those executed under Mary's religious policy, and it includes images. Even if you can't read them, you can still understand that Mary is, as we might say, the baddie. In a way, of course, this is what Fox says. Acts and Monuments is published during Elizabeth I's reign, when Catholicism is seen as a threat. It's published at a time when Elizabeth and her regime need to justify labeling Catholicism as treason. It's published at a time when the Elizabethan religious scene needs to present itself as tolerant. And the best way to do that? Attack Marian religious policy, because Mary can't defend herself because she's dead. And no one else can defend her because that's treason. In order for Elizabeth and her regime to justify their own religious intolerance, they need to create an image of Mary's reign that makes Elizabeth's look okay. And what better way to do that than show Mary's religious policy executing innocent people, killing women and children even, and in great detail in Fox's work, burning a pregnant woman. Burning those who apparently were just standing up for the right Christian faith. Elizabeth's regime needed to create a bloody Mary in order to justify their own religious policy. When Elizabeth died in that's not right, in 1603, I've definitely written the wrong date down, James VI of Scotland became James I of England. And when he came to England from Scotland, he brought with him his strong Protestantism. When James began negotiating for the marriage of his son to a Spanish Catholic princess, England's people immediately began to worry. They had lived through Elizabeth's reign, some of them, where Catholicism and foreigners, especially Spaniards, were threats. Surely James couldn't be serious about bringing a Catholic Spanish princess to England, who would marry the heir to the throne and give birth to Catholic sons who would become king. The English people, for the most part, reached into their history to use Mary as an example of why this marriage was apparently a terrible idea. Authors such as John Reynolds in his play Vox Coeli presented Mary as a queen who was willing to sell England to Spain, willing to deny England its independence in order to allow Spain to control the country. This, Reynolds argued, was what would happen if England and Spain entered into a marriage again during James's reign. Mary was a touchstone, a historical example of why Spanish Catholics couldn't be trusted. And I am aware of the irony of saying that to an English Catholic historical group. Even though Mary had been dead for over 50 years, she was still presented as a threat to England, all in order to protest Prince Charles, at that point, marrying the Spanish Catholic Infanta Maria. When James VI and first died in 1625, his son Charles I became king. Yes, the same Charles who had been at risk of marrying a Spanish Catholic. What actually happened, though, was that he marries, woman on the screen, the French Catholic Henrietta Maria, which turned out to be great for getting rid of the Spanish influence in England, but not so great for getting rid of fears of a Catholic monarchy in the future. The main role of a queen, especially a queen consort, was to give birth to the heir to ensure dynastic stability. But when that queen was Catholic, there was a great fear that she would raise Catholic children. Catholic children who stood to inherit the crown and, in a sense, make England Catholic again. Once again, guess who makes an appearance as an example of why they can't trust Catholic monarchy? And what makes Mary seem even more of a good example to use to show the apparent threat from Henrietta Maria is that apparently Henrietta Maria was too foreign sounding a name. So she's renamed Queen Mary. Mary I, therefore, becomes synonymous with Henrietta Maria, or the new Queen Mary. And so all these fears which had been taught to English subjects about Mary's the First's reign, from things like Fox's Acts and Monuments and from Reynolds' Vox Coeli, come flooding back, all in order to attack Henrietta Maria without actually naming Henrietta Maria as the target. Even in 1649, when England actively rejected its monarchy, Mary played a significant role in England's understanding of its own identity and its own history. By 1655 and the eighth book of Thomas Fuller's Church History, dynastic succession was a significant topic of discussion. Despite his belief that Mary and her supporters were characterized, I quote, by their carelessness and cowardice, Fuller credited divine providence with resolving, as he put it, with final success to rectify all human mistakes. Yes, Fuller was arguing on Mary's behalf, but not because he liked her. His overall view of Mary was incredibly negative, but he does praise the fact that she fought for her throne when it was taken away from her. Again, this interpretation of Mary's reign is a product of the 1650s and the context in which this new understanding was being written. As Fuller was writing, England was further developing as a republic under the rule of Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell. As Cromwell increasingly took on what many saw to be the role of a monarch, thoughts turned to the royal court in exile. If England was once again to be ruled by a monarch, surely that role should be performed by England's pre-existing king, Charles II, and not by the non-royal Cromwell. Mary's memory was used here not because Fuller and the English Republic liked her, but because she presented an opportunity to implicitly critique Cromwell's own position as Lord Protector, particularly after Parliament offered him the crown. In offering him that crown, Parliament tacitly acknowledged that though it may not like monarchy unilaterally, monarchy and its practice of familial succession provided some perceptible form of stability. Mary is only presented as the good guy when there's a perceived greater threat. Once that threat disappeared, Mary went right back to being the villain, all to justify what later regimes would do and did do in proclaiming Protestantism and especially in those fears about marriage to foreign Catholic royals. Even Mary's tomb supports her erasure from English history. Elizabeth left Mary buried in an unmarked tomb in Westminster Abbey against Mary's explicit wishes. Tombs were still being built in the Abbey at this point, but Mary's was never begun, a signal that Elizabeth thought it was in her best interests to strengthen her own reign by minimizing the role of her Catholic sister and predecessor. In contrast, Elizabeth is well remembered. In 1606, Elizabeth's body was taken from its original resting place and was put with Mary's. The tomb which James VI and First ordered does little to remember Mary. She doesn't appear in the effigy, nor does she really appear in any of the writing on the tomb. Though the effigy which would have been put on her coffin on the left is on display in the Queen's Gallery at Westminster Abbey. Mary exists in only one line on the tomb. Her removal from the visual remembrance of her own life and reign partly explains her displacement from the historical narrative. When opposing narratives collide, the question remains whether one exists solely after the destruction of the other. Mary and Elizabeth's tomb is a microcosm of wider English history, a site of conflicted memory in which opposing narratives have clashed and where one has been declared the victor. The Catholic memory of Mary has been buried, literally and figuratively, under the Protestant narrative of England. Rosamund, I know that I'm eager to bring you into this conversation. Can you talk to us a little bit more about how you approach that complicated framework of Mary's cultural legacy in your own work, Three Queens, and how you think maybe that differs from most portrayals that we've seen in mass culture so far? Because I know you cover a lot of that.
Thank you very much, Johanna, for your first introduction. And before I begin, for those that may not know about my play is called Three Queens, and it's about the night before Lady Jane Grey is due to be executed. And in the play, Lady Grey is brought secretly to Greenwich Palace, where she meets Queen Mary. And in the palace, there is also Princess Elizabeth, who then gets co-opted into the Battle of Wills between Mary and Jane. See, when I started to write the play, I wanted to see these women afresh. So Lady Jane Grey, I don't believe she was the sweet, sickly martyr that she has been portrayed as. And Elizabeth, acting in ways that may not be heroic and in the heroic vein that we have all been given. And then I came to Mary. And as a writer, you have a responsibility about what you are writing and presenting. And I first thought about all the preconceptions and cultural representations of Mary that I grew up with, which, as Johanna says, were mainly through mass media of TV and film. But I wanted to show in my play a woman who was far more complex and interesting. And she must have been, with both Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon for parents. Yet in the modern era, in TV and film, that I've taken in and lived with, as many of us have, Mary has always been portrayed as either a young, foolish girl, if she gets any scenes at all, and that's in her relationship with Henry VIII, or old, ill, and dying in films or TV series about Elizabeth and Elizabeth's glory. I then also thought, where are the films? Where are the TV series about Mary herself and her time? She is always the extra to be sent away or there to die for Elizabeth. Yet Mary was a vital part of this country's history and a vital part of the story of the Tudors. But because she's been painted as the evil Catholic queen that wanted to turn England Spanish, it's seemed to be so far to be inconceivable to center a play, a film, a TV series around her perspective or have her as the main character. The Golden Elizabeth has nearly always been the focus of nearly all TVs and films. And when, as I said, Mary has appeared, she's not been presented that long in the public's imagination. And she's always, usually, if she's portrayed as an older woman, as a really old woman. So the actresses are in their usually early or late 50s, or just an inconsequential 15-year-old with one or two scenes. And she is so much more than that. So, in my preparation for writing Mary as a central character in my play, I read the few history books written about her and study, of course, her timeline. And it does reveal, you can see the glimpses that have been buried of a different person than the one that's so far been portrayed. It shows a brave Mary that was beloved of her people, a people who were incredibly loyal and had such strong, loving feelings towards her. And Mary was generous. We see this. She's generous to her close friends and her loyalists with gifts and bequests. And she loved her family, complicated as it was, and at difficult at times maybe to show, but it peeps through. From Mary sending a priest to Jane in the Tower, which must have been Mary's hope for Jane to convert to Catholicism even in the last hours, to allowing Jane to be put in the warden's house in the Tower rather than a cell. And then we see her, even though she does arrest Elizabeth and sends her to the Tower, we see eventually that Mary, within only a few months, moves Elizabeth to Woodstock under comfortable house arrest. And then a few months later after that, allows Elizabeth to return back to Hatfield. We also see that to her enemies, she's kind, to Robert and Ambrose Dudley, the sons of the Duke of Northumberland. And even though Robert and Ambrose had been very much in the forefront of the rebellion against her and being ardent Protestants, she, although has them arrested and put in the Tower, she doesn't kill them. She lets them live. And there are also reports of Mary giving a poor woman a velvet coat on Maundy Thursday after washing her feet. And there are reports from her servants of huge loyalty and love, as well as most of the nobles in the realm supporting her claim to the throne of England. None of these would have been done if Mary had been this Catholic monster that she's been made out to be since. So in writing Mary for the play, I also wanted to show all these aspects, but also show that Mary was adamant in her faith and passionate about it. And that, like Elizabeth after, unfortunately, Mary does have people put to death because of their difference of faith. So to show maybe that there was a steel inside of her that she would do and make these very difficult decisions. So I didn't want to airbrush these facts, for I think that this would be a disservice to her and to her Catholicism. I didn't want to do the same thing that the Protestants have done for Elizabeth, making into her an iconic, wonderful woman, all glory and none of the pain and suffering that Elizabeth did bring. Within the play, I wanted to show Mary in all her glory, this passionate Catholic, and to show dealing with a family that also found maybe not so properly showing their love and kindness towards Mary when Mary was trying to be kind and generous and loving towards them. And so, which brings me to ask Dr. Stiffell, the Mary that I conjured in Three Queens, does this somehow chime with how her contemporaries also saw her as well?
Yeah, thanks, Rosamund. I mean, she's a woman of so many different shades of grey, and I think the best person to describe her was John White, during Mary's Requiem Mass on the 14th of December, 1558, and he says she was a king's daughter, she was a king's sister, she was a king's wife, she was a queen, and by the same title, a king also. So that's the sort of woman we're dealing with. It's very much not a singular person. It's not Mary Tudor, it's Maria Regina. And we can see Mary's strength throughout her life, in particular in the early months of 1554, when she crushed the rebellion by the Kentishman Thomas Wyatt in his opposition to Mary's choice of groom, Charles V's son, Prince Philip of Spain. As Wyatt neared London, the council were panicking, yet the Queen was steadfast and calm. She knew if Wyatt entered London, she would be sent to the Tower. Therefore, she rode to the Guildhall in London and gave a speech, which she should be more famous for, actually, and Elizabeth definitely borrowed afterwards. I am your queen, to whom at my coronation, when I was wedded to the realm and the laws of the same, the spousal ring whereof I have on my finger, which never hitherto nor hereafter shall be left off. You promised your allegiance and obedience to me, and I say to you, on the word of a prince, I cannot tell how naturally the mother loveth the child, for I was never the mother of any, but certainly if a prince and governor may as naturally and earnestly love her subjects as the mother doth the child, then assure yourselves that I, being your lady and mistress, do as earnestly and tenderly love and favour you. The speech was obviously a triumph, and Mary's forces arrested Wyatt. Mary had succeeded in her second military exhibition in the space of 7 months, the first obviously being her march towards London after Edward's death. So Hans Ewert depicted the Queen in 1558, and the image is the middle one where she's wearing that gorgeous black gown and she's holding that letters patent. So this letters patent she holds symbolises her role as judge and as her mother. Via her power, she can give and take away titles, lands, and deeds. Power rests with her, and no one can usurp what's divinely given. The portrait shows a secure Mary, one who does not tolerate threats. And you may not be able to see in the image there, but it shows her second so-called pregnancy. The gown furthers this security. She has the air in her womb. And if we examine the Queen's belly, you can see it slightly enlarged, and you can see the buttons have been undone to accommodate that. So there's hope for that Catholic air. Another feature of this portrait, actually, is the pattern of the gown she wears. She wears quite a similar design to Philip in one of his portraits by Titian. So Mary consciously copies her husband. They're becoming sort of one being. Could this be her being the new Isabel of Castile, while Philip acts as Ferdinand of Aragon? Perhaps. We definitely know the Venetian ambassador to Charles V, Federico Badour, thought of this when he wrote to his master on the 16th of January 1556, explaining that Mary was now Queen of Philip's territories. The Queen could now style herself as the Queen of many and great crowns, and on her being no less their mistress than of her own crown of England. The phrase Badour uses is of interest. No less their mistress than of her own crown of England. This implies that Mary is not just a queen consort. She's more than that. Her and Philip are, like I've said, they're one being, they're one monarch. Cardinal Reginald Pole, as we all know, he had this view as well, because he wrote to Pope Paul IV on the 30th of March 1558, stating that the piety of the Queen was unlike all others, and called Philip and Mary the Catholic kings. That's the same title Isabel and Fernando had. So these portraits, they may not be nothing more than just a marriage partnership. But I believe Mary and perhaps Philip, maybe unwillingly, were attempting to become one body, one legislator, one monarch. As Queen, Mary needed to be seen. In the words of the late Elizabeth II, I have to be seen to be believed. For Mary, this not only involved her own domestic subjects, but foreign courts. There are a number of portraits in foreign collections, which people, how many of these have people actually been talking about? Not many. The contemporary art historian Karel von Munder certainly speaks about these, because he states that Mary's, the pattern for her head was sent around Europe for members of the Golden Fleece and to Cardinal de Granville, who was a leading Habsburg statesman under Charles and Philip. Examples of these portraits can be seen in this beautiful painting. So the one that she looks a bit older, a bit more fierce, and she has a prayer book and gloves, that's in Versailles. And that's dated from around after 1554, because we normally say it's after more due to the facial pattern. I do question the actual artist in this, but smoother depiction next to it is found in Amsterdam. If we look at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, which is the one at the top, that's dated post 1556, and it was commissioned by Cosimo I de' Medici and was painted by Cristofano dell'Attesimo. And it forms part of a collection copied from portraits gathered by the Italian Renaissance historian and biographer Paolo Giovio. What's interesting about that portrait is that it actually inspires the later 18th and 19th century engravings of the Queen. So if you look at the portraits and the books in those 2 centuries, compare the costume and compare the facial patterns, they're very, very similar. I mean, what's a beautiful portrait? Well, it's not a portrait, it's a fresco. And it's found in Sicily. And this was commissioned by the Ragazzonis, who were a Venetian family who received their wealth through trade. Giacomo Ragazzoni was a merchant serving the Henrician court, where he was known as James Ragazson. And it's believed he had developed a strong friendship with Mary when she was a young woman. In 1554, Giacomo obtained permission to have the Tudor rose on his coat of arms, and that was granted by Mary. This fresco forms part of a pictorial cycle illustrating the successes of the Regazzoni brothers, and we believe it's the Italian artist Francesco Montesano who actually painted this fresco. And Mary kept in touch with this family for years. Only today I was looking at her New Year's gift roll, which were, their version of Christmas, really, where they received gifts and presents. And she's been given presents by the Ragazzonis, a bit of gold, maybe some nice silk velvet gloves and whatnot. So that they had this sort of close relationship, and he's quite high up on the list as well, which sort of shows his importance. But I guess the most powerful image of the Queen was on coinage. Everyone had access to coinage. Everyone would have had access to this coin, which is a gross, so it's 4 pence. It was the most common of coinage and was used every day in everyday interactions, from the servant boy to an aristocrat. The Marian gross is the image of the Queen with the best survival rate, mostly due to its popularity and, everyone's using one. The coin shows a Roman empress. The Queen is dignified, and her position is unquestioned. Crowned and decked in jewellery, the Queen is supreme head of her kingdom. Her virginity is emphasised with her loose hair, and she doesn't wear a partlet, which is sort of the top part of the dress. She wears pearl earrings and a pearl necklace with a cross. On the reverse of the coin, her motto, Veritas Temporis Filia, truth is the daughter of time, emphasizes her primary message. She was the truth. She was the rightful heir, and she was England's divine queen. So Rosamund's play Three Queens emphasizes this loving and dutiful queen. Throughout the scenes, you can see there's that struggle between Mary Tudor and Maria Regina. And we have to remember, when became queen, she was no longer that Mary Tudor. She wasn't the forgotten princess. She was now Maria Regina. She could not allow for any threat to take fruit. So Three Queens depicts a queen who had to make the hard decisions to ensure stability. Mary was a woman who lived through tragedy, but was strong-willed. And I feel the best way to explain this really is the wonderful actress who played Mary in the show, Becky Black, and I'll allow her to have the final word.
There is nothing more I can do. I cannot pardon her, not as she is. If she'd have followed our faith, shown that she walks with me, then I could. But she rejected it all. Do you really think I want this to happen to her? Can you not see I have tried my best to save her? Jane damns herself. I will be able to bear what must be done. I am doing God's work that will glorify my soul and save this kingdom too. I will be the warrior to save England's heart and soul, to make it a mighty kingdom again. The people want that. They see me as the rightful heir. They want to be Catholic again. I will do what I must, even if it breaks my heart.
So I'll hand back to Joe and Rosamund to any final remarks.
And I'll unmute myself while I talk. So that is kind of our overview of basically Mary's legacy, how that then has been brought into popular culture and how that's maybe influenced or challenged what Rosamund is doing in her work. And then looking at kind of how that almost brings us full circle to how Mary was perhaps seen during her own reign, as we can see through the portraiture, through the coinage. And so really we hope in this that we have helped you to see kind of how we got to where we got about 30 years ago, how that is changing, how we're seeing that play out today, and then how that, in a sense, reflects how I think Mary herself would have seen her and her reign. Yeah, anything either of you want to add to that? Amazing. So that is our official bit done. We are happy to take questions. happy to, I guess, take comments. But yeah, more than happy to hear everyone's thoughts. Oh no, I can see Tim reading, but you're muted.
Oh,
There
sorry.
we go.
Sorry, I had muted myself and forgotten to unmute, so that was a bit of an error there. So yes, if Peter and Rosamund could unmute, then we could hear them. So, right. So if you have any questions, please put them into the box, the chat box there, and we can then see what your question is. I can see there's a few things that are appearing in there. I must admit, I personally have been inspired by Johanna's work and by Peter's work from listening to them before. And I'm a great fan of Mary the First anyway. And in their talks in the past, they've made it very, very clear. And other things that they've done, podcasts and things that I've seen them do as well on the internet. It's full of wonderful things like that. It really is quite an amazing story of Queen Mary and how she was vilified and how she was kind of portrayed as a sort of a witch or a terrible person or a wicked Catholic, and with links to foreign Spain, which is the worst thing they could possibly imagine. Um, Part of it is fear of the foreigner, I think, or fear of foreign countries. I think that was part of it. And at the Reformation period, unfortunately, England did cut itself off from Europe in so many different ways, culturally, religiously, and so on, and then seemed to be very, very scared of continental countries, in particular of Spain. I wonder whether they had, I mean, today politicians and people in the public eye have spin doctors, public relations, people like that. Did Mary have people like that to kind of publicize the way she was meant to be seen by people?
I'm going to throw that to Peter to answer for during her reign, because I can answer the bits after that.
Yes. I'm trying to think of the best answer to this. Um, yeah, I mean, she was never seen as the bad guy. I mean, I can't remember who exactly. It was like it was at Seaton or someone. Like as soon as she became, well, I mean, she was always like the beloved princess. She was very. I think I said this in another talk. She had the Diana effect, right? Everyone thought, oh, she's wonderful. What's happened is an absolute tragedy. Um, and everyone always supported her throughout her life. And then also you have Edward's reign, and everything intensifies, and they're still thinking, well, hang on, Edward's this minority, he's only a child. We know what child mortality is like. We don't actually know if he's going to live or not. And anyway, none of it's his fault anyway, because it's all his evil uncles and his advisors doing this. So then obviously when she becomes queen, it's like it's a miracle on earth. I mean, the accounts of her family when she has her army and they're ready to fight, she has thousands of people turning up, and she comes down on this white horse. And some people say it's as if God himself has come down because the reverence they give to her. And there's accounts of her being quite set back, actually. I don't think she ever truly understood how popular she was because of everything that she went through. And I don't think she ever did realize how important, how much people loved her.
I think
Obviously, you had her enemies and everything, but
she sort of doubted herself and doubted her abilities or doubted the loyalty of people.
yeah, I mean, I think it's a mixture of both. I mean, I don't think she doubted her abilities as such because she's been brought up to always think that she was going to reign. In her mother's eyes anyway, and she had that Spanish blood. She had that determination. But in terms of loyalty with others, I don't think she ever could trust anyone after what happened. I mean, she obviously had her closest advisors and her closest female friends, but I don't think she ever trusted men because after everything her father had done and all of you know that whole era of hers, and then you have Dudley, and then you have Edward, and you have Northumberland. I think she found it very difficult to trust men because but they didn't listen to her. I mean, there's accounts of her having to scream at the in the Privy Council because they just won't listen to her. Obviously, they learned afterwards when Elizabeth became queen. But yeah, I think the people around her didn't help with her doubts. So when she obviously, began her policies, which can be a bit controversial, well, they everyone's sort of to blame for it really, because she thought it's God's will. I have to do this. This is why the bad things are happening, because I've allowed these heretics, as she saw them, to carry on. And everyone was doing the burdens and the executions at the time, so it's nothing new. So I don't know if Joe wants to sort of carry on with that, but yeah, I mean, it's a very mixed bag, I think.
She did
Yeah,
come
and
from a strong female line, though, of course, didn't she, with her mother and grandmother? So it was a very strong female line, at least, anyway.
yeah, what's that saying? What's a queen without her king? Historically more powerful. Um, and I think Peter really hits that on the head there, that there's such a difference between her reign and then everything that kind of comes afterwards, once everyone knows kind of where the dust is settling and what side is going to come out victorious. And I think it's kind of hopefully kind of self-evident or obvious that Catholic writers are much more positive to Mary. That we do get some form of apologists in a sense, in kind of the true sense of that word. They are writing in defense of her, and the problem in England is that that doesn't kind of get widely um, monarchically supported. And so because it then is almost stuck in this in a group, it doesn't get to break out of that Catholic narrative and become kind of a dominant English national narrative. And so it's really interesting then to look at that and to see that there is this very dominant, she's bad, Elizabeth is good, and that kind of continues. And I'm sure we'll get to it, but it continues into the curriculum that we teach today. And I think the thing that stood out to me when I was first starting the PhD, when I was trying to decide when am I going to start, when am I going to end in terms of historical dates, like what are my bookends going to be? And before I realized that it was wildly unrealistic, I thought I might get to Jane Austen when she writes about the monarchy. And she writes a very sympathetic, maybe isn't the right word, but she writes a very maybe positive, I think satirical bit on Mary. And that's, again, largely as it is for all of these Protestant authors who are denigrating Mary because they're Protestant, because of their environment. Jane Austen comes at it from this very different perspective, that kind of there are tensions in the Church of England at the time, and she's grown up with that, she's seen that. And so her interpretation of Mary is then very much based on her own feelings towards the Church of England. So therefore, they're based on her own feelings about Elizabeth, which are not the most positive. And so it's interesting there to see that there is, of course, scope for Mary to be kind of praised, or at least not publicly vilified. But it does come from, I don't want to say a fringe group, because they do still have a voice and they do still play a massive role in the narrative. But it comes from a group that has been kind of pushed out of that dominant narrative. They've been pushed out, in a sense, of the history. And you then really only see that come back in when kind of people want to challenge that. And that, I would say, was certainly the case until kind of 20 to 30 years ago. Historians started looking at Mary and actually going, well, hang on a second, is that true? Yeah.
And I think, sort of just jumping in, I think that for writers and sort of adding to the cultural landscape, this might have happened sooner, but you have World War II happening. So sort of then you have to have Europe. Europe is again the bad place. So you've got to have Britain alone. So you've got loads of films about Henry VIII. You get all the films about Elizabeth starting to come out. You get that in the 40s going into the 50s. So it's the home front. And here's the Protestant historical narrative that we've all brought up and know regurgitated. And again, that same thing of Mary, if she's there, oh, she'll ally herself with Europe, and Europe at this time is anathema. And so if you show her, it's not that long, or if you show her, she's an old sick woman. And as Johanna said, historians have sort of started to change that narrative, and the writers have sort of started to produce films and TVs. So you have Becoming Elizabeth, where you have a much stronger, you have Romo Gallery, you see the love that she has a huge retinue and people are really for her. She's more within her age range that she should be played with. And you get Patsy Ferran in Firebrand, more stronger scenes. So you're sort of starting to edge towards actually this very important within England's history of this first Queen Regnant, really, which is undisputed. Having a bigger say, having a bigger slice of the action, having more attention with all that she is. And yeah, she's Catholic. And so it always makes me feel quite amused, the sort of hate towards of wanting to marry somebody from Europe, because you see in the past before, really, Henry VIII, and he was trying to just all the kings and queen, all the kings marrying princesses from Europe. So it's not an unknown thing, but when it comes to Mary, it's like, if she is being focused on, it's this terrible thing that she wants to ally herself Europe. But yeah, so, sorry, I hijacked you.
I think a lot of people's image is Glenda Jackson as Queen Elizabeth, really, in the film, sort of famous film, and a lot of people sort of see her like that. But there was a great glorification, as you say, from the 1940s onwards, particularly of Elizabeth, and sort of almost godlike figure of beauty and charm and all sorts of, and it was just a made up imagery, really.
Yeah.
The reality is completely, totally different.
Yeah, and absolutely, and the best way, as a writer, to play that against is to show a very old and elderly, Queen Mary at the end. So you have, not to say that the actors aren't wonderful, they're all wonderful who play Mary, but it's sort of like Daphne and Salter, sort of the hair is, Elizabeth R in the TV series, she looks so old. And then, when I was probably doing all my research, it's like, actually, and even I knew from my history, Mary wasn't that old when she died. But we've been giving these, these fictional characters that we then process into our cultural landscape. And it makes us feel, or with the last true Catholic queen, that's what a face of Catholicism. And it's strange. And I think Peter and Joe said before, ultimately most people in the country at the time when Mary was young were still Catholic. They may have been sort of slightly Henrican and have got a bit of Catholicism going, but the majority of the people weren't Protestant, they were Catholic. And people completely forget that. And
it was Edward VI that really changed things, wasn't it? And then he caused, or partly caused, a rebellion in 1549 with the Prayer Book rebelling in the West Country and Oxfordshire and parts of the Midlands, and then there was Kett's rebellion as well in East Anglia, etc., etc. So, but the big problem, I suppose, with Mary is the burnings, really, that you can't kind of get away from it. And Eamon Duffy in Fires of Faith has a chapter on that, and it's kind of a difficult area. And I'm a great fan of Eamon Duffy. I met him about a year ago today in Oxford, actually, and it's a wonderful historian. But it is a problem. It is a problem for scholars of this period, of how you kind of explain that, and it's very complex and very difficult. And we can't see ourselves in their shoes exactly, because we're not like them and we don't think like them, and they thought they were doing the right thing for the right reasons or whatever. But there's also the argument that Mary wasn't even responsible, that the laws uh, had been passed by Parliament prior to her reign in any case, and she wasn't responsible for that. So the laws were made by Parliament, and they were enforced by sheriffs and the courts, the judiciary, the church courts, etc., of which Mary didn't have full control over anyway. And sometimes people overestimate the power and control that Mary had over the country, over the people, over whatever was going on, because probably she didn't, in fact, actually. And I personally have that school of thought that I don't think she was personally responsible. I think she couldn't stop it very easily once this processes had started, but then she gets the blame, even if she wasn't responsible for those deaths and for those burnings and things like that. But it is a problem to kind of explain and get over, which a lot of people stumble over really, because that's the issue, I think. Should we just go to the questions, just conscious of time, really,
Yeah.
in the box that's there. So if anybody hasn't put a question in, please do. And we have a question here from the wonderfully titled Bandit Queen. It says, how can we get the True Mary into the national curriculum and the Bloody Mary label banned? Well, tricky one.
This is why they don't let me teach GCSE. Um, um, I think the big thing, I'm just going to jump in there with my teacher hat on. I think one of the problems is that the curriculum, I mean, it is slow to change, just full stop. And I think it's especially slow to change because for historians and for those kind of in the know in that new research, even though it doesn't feel very new to us anymore, it is still relatively new, kind of for, I guess, the public, for the average person who's going into Waterstones looking at a book. And I think the problem there is that it's so hard to change a national narrative. And even um, when you get life in the UK tests to become a British citizen, there are questions when people post them and go, these are some of the practice questions. I'll read them as a historian, and they'll be about Elizabeth I. And I'll go, well, that's not true. And the friends go, duh, duh, answer the question how it wants to be answered. Don't think about it. Just write what they want you to say. And I think that's the problem, is that we have just this very, very, I guess, entwined narrative of Mary is bad and Catholicism is bad, and we don't like foreigners. Um, and I think it's really hard to change that. And we can't change that overnight. And I do think we can be a little bit better about it. But I think that's the problem, is that the national curriculum, that kind of citizenship tests, to challenge a narrative that is so ingrained in who people are, even if they don't think that it is quite difficult. And I think that's also the challenge, is when you get to kind of GCSE. So for those elsewhere in the world, kind of 14, 15, 16-year-olds in education, they're not quite as much as I think we would want them to be. The average student that age is not, for the purpose of the exam, ready for all of that complexity and nuance. And it just, like, if you got into every single way that history is messy, we would still be teaching GCSEs when they're 40. And that's not to say that kids can't handle it, but I think because you only have 2 years to get them through all of this, it's then very hard to go, well, actually, here's this, but also this, but also that. And you can start to get that when they move into the sixth form. So by the time they're, 16, 17, 18, 19. But it is a challenge, obviously, trying to get that. And especially when you're starting to teach the tutors to kind of year 7 and 8. So when you're looking at kind of 9 to 12-year-olds, you don't really want your kid going home at the end of the day and being like, Dr. Strong taught me about burning people today. It's not really the memo you want getting sent home. And so I think that's part of the problem. But it is something that kind of I talk to my students about, not necessarily explicitly because I don't get to teach Mary, but we talk about kind of, this is how history is written, and this is sometimes why the history is written the way that it is. And so we talk about it in the context that we're studying to say, okay, well, why would someone have this perspective of the 1930s in Spain? Why would someone have this perspective of Mao's China? And I think that's the thing, is you kind of get them started thinking, so that when they get introduced to that, kind of when they go out into the world and they go, oh, well, hang on a second, that doesn't quite track, that hopefully we've set them up that they can be the ones who eventually might get the curriculum changed.
And
Sorry, that was a really long answer.
and sorry to, I think also there's a thing with the curriculum is that a lot of the times they want to, in different subjects, want to cross work with each other. So if you're studying a lot of Shakespeare and Shakespeare's your set text, you're going to be looking more at Elizabeth. You're going to be looking more at the politics of the time, the art and probably the hagiography and iconography of Queen Elizabeth, rather than you don't putting my play in the national curriculum. You don't have the plays. You don't have our English playwrights, our English playwright of all time writing a play about Mary. So it's not there. So if she's not there in the cultural language or in the books or to be studied and cross-fertilized with different departments, why? There's a question of why would you have to do her, because we've got Macbeth or we've got another of Shakespeare plays, and it's great. We can then talk about the Elizabethan history or the early reign of James. So I think that kind of that is another barrier, I think.
We could, if we had time, talk about the Shakespeare and Catholicism connections in the light of recent research by Bristol University, but we haven't got time today, so we won't do that. But
This is the problem.
again?
This is the problem. There's not enough time to do everything.
Another time. I mean, yes. Well, we did have a talk by Lady Oxford before on shadow play before some while ago, but I think it's a few years ago now. And when we asked her, she wasn't very well or something or other, and didn't seem to want to do another one. Whatever. We did ask her, I think. Anyway, we better move on. So here's another one from the same person, actually. How can we counter accusations that the marriage of Philip and Mary remained unpopular, even after the defeat of the White Rebellion? And of course, the White Rebellion creates another problem for Mary and putting down that rebellion and putting Wyatt in the Tower, etc., etc. But was the marriage of Philip and Mary that unpopular?
No, it was no, it wasn't. And a lot of Spanish scholars have looked into this, like Alexander Sampson and Gonzalo. They've really gone into this. And I mean, if you actually look at who actually opposed it, it's a very small minority of people. And if you actually cross-reference who these people are, well, they're all Protestants. Well, of course they're going to not approve of it, are they? They don't want a Spanish heir to the throne coming into England and that whole fear of him taking over. The government made sure that he never did, and he couldn't. And when Philip actually read the marriage treaty, apparently he was furious. But he got on with it because it was duty. Duty comes first. And there's a lot of not just ambassador reports, but lots of reports from people saying, "Oh, we didn't approve it initially, but actually, when you've met the king, and when the crowd saw the king, oh, he's actually not this villain that we all thought he was going to be. He's very chivalric and generous and handsome and all this sort of stuff." And you have to. I think the trouble with the marriage is there wasn't enough time. If they'd been married 10, 15, 20 years, then England would have benefited from it. With the New World, with the Empire. But sadly, because it only lasted 4 years, there just wasn't enough time for England to benefit from the successes of the empire at the time. I mean, we know obviously there was inspiration from it because like I've said in Mary's Christmas gifts, she's receiving all these exotic fruits, and I mean, she's eating turkey at Christmas. Now, I didn't know that until I knew this today. I thought, oh, that's interesting because we always think turkey and sugar is all like an Elizabethan thing. Well, no, Mary's receiving this in 1557. So there is that. And Philip and Mary, it was a popular marriage. It worked. It didn't have the desired effects, but we have to try to move away from this whole, oh, it was unpopular because he was Spanish, because it wasn't. And he was the only one she could have married. She can't marry an Englishman. because you have that whole conversation about, well, would you call the husband of a queen? He is a king when they marry. He's the king of Naples. And Mary can't see her marrying anyone below her. So, and no one else was eligible. They were either too old or too young. And there's only 11 years difference between them. So I mean, we may have a bit of a thing about it, but even today, we don't question celebrities marrying people 20, 30 years older or younger than them, do they? You know, I won't name any names, but we all know who these people are. So, and there wasn't a big thing really. I just think it just didn't have time.
Mary sort of laid the groundwork, and Elizabeth reaped the benefits, really, as somebody said once, which
Yes,
just grossly unfair, really. But then life is short, and her life was short. And
The
as you say, it
older
seems,
the older kid, let me
yeah,
tell you.
yes,
Not actually.
sibling rivalry and things. But
Yeah.
in many ways, it was the Protestants who were fearful of Catholic Spain or foreigners, and many of the Catholics were probably far less so. But different authors have different views. I think I've got about 5 or 6 books on Mary or something on the shelf, and I think each writer seems to have their own point of view and their own way of thinking or spin on things and so on. But then historians kind of have to kind of question their motives, don't they? And like, why am I writing this? How am I writing it? Do I have bias in this? Am I trying to put across a narrative? And so on. And for years and years and years, the narrative was Elizabeth good, Mary bad, basically. That's pretty much in a nutshell what historians came out with, because they had the establishment Church of England line that they've been fed for decades or centuries that, oh, Elizabeth was the wonderful queen, the amazing person, and Mary was just like a really bad blip that in our history, which you mustn't mention. It's like, don't mention the war, it's like, a really bad time. And they emphasised the burnings and Wyatt's rebellion and various things, and Lady Jane Grey and all sorts of things that get mentioned in that time. And unfortunately, Mary comes out as a really bad person and all that bad press, really. Anyway, we'll see what else we've got here. So, question said, do you each of you have a favourite image or media depiction? Peter, do you have a favourite?
well, I'll be here all day. Um, I mean, I always like the more images, and I do like the UF images. But just to change it up a bit, I think the fresco this week is my favourite this week because it's just so different. I mean, who would have known that there's an image of Mary in Italy? And it's all about it's all about that relationship, and the fact that the Ragazzoni family felt that they should depict her just shows how close she was to anyone really. If you're loyal to her, she's loyal back to you. And the fact that she allowed them to use the Tudor rose as part of their coat of arms, sort of it shows that mutual respect, I think. But I'll let the other two talk about theirs because I'll go on for all night.
Yes. Uh,
Oh, I find it really difficult because there are so many great actresses, but I really like the Roma gallery in Becoming Elizabeth. It's just it shows a stronger Mary, really, and one who's also politically astute, and she has a lot of lines, which is what I love as well. And of course, I have to say, because I love Becky Black, who was in the little extract that you saw, who was awesome. So yeah, but I'm sure hopefully there'll be lots more to love and to compete with.
Yeah, I've got to say, I think my favorite Marys are the Marys you don't expect. Um, so like going to the Uffizi and you just like look up and there's a Mary, and you aren't expecting it. And I think those are always the fun ones when you go, hang on a second, and you're like, Peter, is this a Mary? I think those are always fun because you expect to see her like in the National Portrait Gallery. You expect to see her in the Prado. I don't expect to see her when I visit my sister in Boston, but there she is. I think those are my favorite, which I know is a genre and not one. Um, but I do have to say, I think the shout out I want to give for my favorite Mary is the Mary that I the first Mary that I saw, there we go. The first Mary that I saw that was sympathetic and kind of caring and that is Sarah Bolger in the Tudors. I think she just, yeah, I set the stage, no pun intended, for all of the other depictions of Mary that are so much more human. And I think it's where obviously the Marys before her, as Rosamund has said, are played beautifully. But I just fundamentally don't agree with how they're scripted. And I think that was the first time that I saw in film a Mary that I felt was scripted well and played well. Um, yeah.
We need more like TV dramas, costume dramas about Mary's reign because there's been so many over the years, films and TV
Yeah.
series about the Elizabethan period,
Yeah.
but not much about Mary's reign really, or not in a major way really. So it's a central character.
If we
Um,
had money and time, this
so
would be different.
you need to write the script, I think. So and then
If,
send it to the BBC, something like that. Anyway.
yeah.
Right. So another question here anyway. Is Mary the First perceived differently outside the UK? I'm not sure where outside the UK, but anyway, but possibly in
Like,
Catholic Europe, maybe.
So the short answer is yes, especially in Spain. And like I said, the Spanish scholars are very much into this at the moment. She's still seen as that saintly queen and good Queen Mary. Actually, it's the complete opposite over here. Um, yeah, because I think that there's the fun fact is that there's a metro station named after her in Spain. I don't know if it's in Madrid or somewhere there. So they can have a metro station. They might have a statue. I'm not sure. We do have a statue of Mary. Not many people probably know where it is. It's in Parliament. It's on the well, you've got actually two. You've got her on outside of it, and then you've also got her in the lobby. Um, so yeah, Spain's very much pro Mary. I'm not sure what the rest of Europe really thinks. But yeah, there is that sort of difference between European perspective and then the English perspective. But as I said before, that's very much because of the Catholic Protestant difference.
I think that is the difference. It's the sort of particularly Catholic Spain because, of course, her mother, the Spanish connection, mother, grandmother, and so on, and obviously the Protestant narrative or the official Church of England establishment that was of her differed hugely. Sort of, and under Elizabeth, England became much more separated from continental Europe culturally, really, whereas Mary was much more open, wasn't she, with her Spanish ancestry and Spanish husband and so on. So there was much more strong connection. So you can imagine the Spanish being very positive about her, and probably in Italy as well, I'm sure too.
Yeah. As my dad says, just because you're an island doesn't mean you have to act like one. So
Mm.
basically, just because Britain is an island doesn't mean that it needs to go, no, 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 there's no other Europe out there. And I think that's effectively what so much of the dominant narrative does. She'd be like, nope, we're not talking about it. We're not dealing with it. If it's not this side of the channel, we don't care.
I think that's cultural, that's historical. It's like a legacy of
Yeah,
the British Empire, the English-speaking empire, and so on, different from funny foreigners abroad who speak funny languages or something or other. Is kind of that's changing. Culture is changing, gone, hopefully anyway. But yes, it's a historical thing, I think,
yeah,
really.
yeah. I mean, even in the narratives of like the Second World War, oh, Britain's never been invaded. Fairly
Yes,
sure the Channel Islands would think very differently.
yes.
But yeah, it's just that narrative of, I guess, where does England, I won't throw Scotland and Wales and Ireland under the bus for this one. But where does England see itself starting and ending?
Mm. Okay, there's my phone buzzing in the background. I know who it is. It's a reporter from American news channel wants to talk to me. Yeah, so interesting. We'll have a look. Another question here. Peter and Johanna, what scholarly aspects of Queen Mary will you be pursuing in the future? And Rosamund, is your play, if your play was made into a film, who is in your dream cast of actresses to play the three principal roles?
I'm happy to answer first if Peter and I want to go to give Ross some time to think there.
You
Um,
go first.
I think that my big project right now that I need to remind myself that I need to sit down and actually do. Is, as Tim mentioned, I'm writing a monograph. So basically turning my PhD thesis into a book that will hopefully one day be on my shelf, if not other people's shelves. So that is kind of my big thing. But amidst the teaching and trying to have a life and all of that other stuff, um, I don't know how people do it, but that is my scholarly pursuit in the next few years, is that needs to get done. And in the midst of all of that, I'm writing some chapters. I'm working on a collection with a friend and a colleague. So I've got many, many plates that somehow are still spinning. Um, so yeah, that's kind of my focus, is on the book and on some chapters and hopefully an edited collection at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got two edited collections which are currently in the works. I don't think I can talk about one of them. The other one is about Mary's patronage, because we always seem to forget that she was actually a very good patron. I think that's coming up next year. I'm not quite sure on timings of that yet. But also, I'm still obviously working on my website, which has loads of images of Mary, drpeterstiffell.com. So if you want to, because I'm always sick of everyone looking at the same 2 or 3 images. So hopefully the website's, it's in progress, because obviously you have to wait for image rights and all that sort of stuff. But hopefully you'll see more, well, different depictions of Mary, not just the paintings, but also, like I said, the coins, the legal documents, um, the great seals, etc. So working on that, and I'm currently working on Mary's pregnancy. I can't say anything else about that at the minute, but it will hopefully change the narrative. And just a quick plug, if any of you are in London or fancy gold coins, at the end of them on the 30th of September, Spinks Auction House have a sale, and they have one of every. Well, they've got a gold coin from Henry III all the way to His Majesty the King, and there's some beautiful Mary ones for sale. So if anyone wants to have a look at that, just Google Spinks, and hopefully all the details are up. I'm not quite sure if the actual link's up yet, but there will be a catalogue and everything else come out in the next couple of weeks, I think. But yeah, the sales at Spinks in London on the 30th of September, if anyone's interested, which I've been helping with.
And yes, just to answer I'm going to be I'm going to say I can't think of my dream 3 actresses, because every time you have a production, you meet, I know so many great actors, I've seen so many great actors. So that's a lovely question, but unfortunately one I don't think I can answer, because you'll have a casting director who brings an actor to you and they're just great. So I'm sorry to say that I can't think of my 3 greatest actresses. Yeah. So sorry.
Here's a plug for an actor. If you need a male actor, Philip Roche, a very good actor. He was Francis Walsingham in Gunpowder, BBC thing. I've known Philip for a very long time. He's a very old friend of mine, and he would be excellent, I'm quite sure. So I can put you in touch with him if you like.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got yeah. Let me see. Yep. One person said, "Thank you for all of you for revealing a wonderful evening with Mary the First." Sister Wahlberger said, "Before I was aware of this new research, I had imbibed the view that Mary was a pathetic woman, as she had phantom pregnancies and adored her husband who didn't care for her. She was a stereotypical miserable, wizened woman. Was this a deliberate narrative?" Well, I think the answer is pretty much yes. But anyway, what do you think?
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah, it's one of those things where you try to understand the present by looking to the past. And in order to understand the present, or at least from what I've found, that it becomes so easy to go, oh, well, she was the queen. She must have had all the power. She's the bad guy. Or to go, well, she's a woman. A woman can't be in charge of anything. Must have been the men around her. Where actually it probably is a lot more complex
Mhm.
balance of the two. And I think that's the thing is because of that shifting perspective of kind of what women can or cannot, I guess societally acceptably do. Um, it really brings that idea that kind of, well, she didn't, especially in the Victorian era, she didn't have kids. What a failed woman. Like, well, actually, she did a lot else. She doesn't just have to have kids to be a good person. Um, and I think, yeah, it becomes this narrative that it just doesn't fit with Protestant monarchy. It doesn't fit with monarchs who have lots of children and whose succession comes through sons or daughters or grandchildren. It just she doesn't really fit what comes to be seen as acceptable. And I think that as society changes, we can challenge that more easily.
I'd say there are three things that are factors. Misogyny, and I've numbered these. Misogyny is number one. I think there's a lot of misogyny against her, is what you see. Two, Protestantism, basically, the Protestant narrative. And three, xenophobia, which came linked with the Protestantism, really. And I think those are the three major factors, really, personally.
Those are when I wrote the thesis, it was Queen Mary, it was Catholic Mary, and it was Spanish Mary. And so it was basically they don't like her because she's woman in power. They don't like her because she's Catholic, and they don't like her because she's allegedly more Spanish than English. So yeah, basically, in a nutshell. Please still buy my book, but those are the highlights.
Yes. Anything, Peter, you want to add?
Yeah, well, I mean, just want to say, nice to see you, sister. Thank you for coming. Yeah, I mean, Joe's said everything really in the end, and it's just this whole phantom pregnancy thing. It really does drive me around the bend because I think it's an awful term, and we shouldn't use it because one, we don't know what happened. We're not all there, and they didn't have the medical knowledge that we do now. And when I'm, just to tease a bit of what I'm going to go into, it's a lot more complicated than the traditional narrative says about what happened. I can't go into the details, but I think people need to start actually looking at the sources properly. And I think is it John Fox who we normally credit for this phantom thing. Well, he doesn't actually say phantom firstly. If you actually read what he says, and everyone's always focused on the first half of the sentence when he discusses this. No one's ever looked at the second half. So if anyone's interested, look at Fox's Book of Martyrs. I think it's the 1563 edition or the first edition, and read what he actually says, and then you can then start questioning everything else. Because she thought she was pregnant, everyone else thought she was pregnant. Are we all saying they were all idiots? I doubt it. There was something else that happened there. And she was never this miserable woman, really. It's just all just a Protestant narrative. Out of all of them, she was actually the kindest, and I don't think she was the happiest. But if you actually look at the famous Antonius More portrait in the Prado, if you actually zoom in on the face, so you can do that online, she's actually smiling or a bit smirking. That's the only Tudor person I know in portraiture that smiles. Well, great monarch anyway. So we just need to sort of just change this whole narrative, really.
Mm.
And I would also add with the paintings, you sort of have Elizabeth I basically has a Photoshop face for all her reign. She's always 25. And whereas Mary is showing herself, she's, this proud, strong woman, and she doesn't hide her face. And I think that's an amazing thing. And I think that gets forgotten a lot as well, too.
Mm. Is it possible that she suffered from cancer? I wonder.
Second time, yes. And there may have been a reason why she had cancer. But that was due to complications from earlier, which the article will go into. Because if we looked at the actual effigy, which Johanna kindly had on the PowerPoint, she's depicted pregnant with that swollen stomach, and it was actually it's very moving. If you actually, when you go into the Diamond Jubilee galleries and actually look at the effigy, because it's life size, it is meant to be life size, so you can see roughly how tall she was and her body proportions, and no wonder she thought she was pregnant the second time, because from where you can see the lump, well, the bump, it's is Joe getting out? Oh, good. If Joe just puts it up, then it'll be easier to sort of show everyone. But yeah, it's you can see why she thought she was pregnant, and I mean, you have to feel sorry for the poor woman. She's 42 when she dies, and she's not had the best life. But she went out fighting, I think, and if she just had 5, 10 more years, we wouldn't even be talking about the whole pregnancy thing, because there's lots of monarchs who didn't have children. So we shouldn't put that against her, because it's not her fault. There's nothing she could have done. If her father had married off her earlier, she may have been able to have children. Sadly, we just don't know.
I think her early years were quite sad, weren't they? The way she felt rejected by her father, and conflict with Elizabeth and so on, and sort of it was an unhappy time for her, and not accepting her stepmother and that sort of thing, and the way her mother was treated, sent away, and it must have been a very, very, I mean, if she didn't suffer from depression, it would be surprising, really, what we would call depression, of course, today. One final question here, if it may, because I'm conscious of time, from Roland. It says, why did Mary never complete a grander tomb of her beloved mother, Catherine of Aragon? Also, maybe she didn't have time, who knows? Also, did Mary die of influenza or of cancer? We've just sort of touched on the cancer, haven't we? Ultimately, we don't know the answer to that one, I think.
We always discuss the second bit. So yeah, in terms of the first part, she just didn't have time, and there wasn't any money. If she'd had more time and she had less priority, I think yes, she wanted to. The will clearly states she wants Catherine to be moved to Westminster with her, and they're going to have this grand tomb, mother and daughter.
Yeah.
Obviously, it never gets completed. So there were plans for it. I don't know if there were any drawings or anything else, but Mary only had 5 years. In hindsight, we think, oh, why didn't she do it? Well, she didn't know she was going to die in 1558. She thought she had another 5, 6 years, 10 years ahead. So there were plans, but you had to think of the actual logistics, having to move the body, then bring it down from Peterborough, then put it into Westminster. It's not not even a 1 week thing. It takes a lot of time and planning and everything else, and also due respect. And Mary worked from dawn till, well, I think she started work at 6 o'clock in the morning. She didn't end till midnight. So and it's just constant, constant, constant. You then obviously have the religious policies she's got to deal with. She then has to deal with Philip. She then has to deal with the coinage and everything else, because the country's bankrupt when she inherits. So, and that's her first priority. We need to get the country back on track. Get out of this deficit, get growth happening. So that has to be the priority. Sentiments have to be put to one aside just for a moment. And I don't think she would have been able to make a tomb for her mother without her father. Because maybe people may have started questioning, well, why haven't you made a tomb for your father? But it's okay for you to do one for your mother. Because she had to keep being that heir of Henry. Yes, everyone knew she was Catherine's heir, and she was Catherine's daughter at the end of the day. But she had to keep telling her, especially the Protestant subjects, I am Henry's daughter. So it was just time, lack of money, and that awkward, it avoided the awkward question of, why haven't you commemorated your father?
It's true that there was kind of chaos after the end of Edward's reign, really, and financially the country was in a terrible state. Really, he left it in a complete mess. I mean, there was Edward's sixth reign was a mess anyway. I think, with the West Country Rising and various other things, and Kett's Rebellion, and people unhappy with the religious changes forced upon them, and then the financial things, because fiscally the country was pretty much on its knees, really. And she did an amazing job, really. She was fighting fires all the time, I think, really. Not that's a bit of a pun, really, with Mary, of course, but she was actually struggling to keep control and persuade the men, particularly those in power that she was she was a rightful queen regnant, and that she was equivalent to a king, and she was darn well going to get on with it, and they had to just put up with it. But yeah, it was a very difficult time for her. She had everything stacked against her pretty much, really. As you said, it hinted lots of things, everything stacked against her, both physically and in terms of the males at the court and in the council and various other places, really. I suppose all the judiciary and the parliament and goodness knows what, really. A complicated mess. Anything anybody wants to add at all? Johanna, anything at all?
I would agree. I would also say if you're in the US and anywhere near Harrisburg, is that where it is? Go see Ross's play. Worth it.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's on from this Friday to Sunday. So thank you very much. Yes, that would be lovely. Support this lovely production and all the lovely actors and the whole crew. That would be wonderful if that's possible.
Amazing team effort to put on a play in a theatre, isn't it? Incredible, so many people involved that you don't even see often as well. Not only just obviously the person writing it, but all the actors, all the backstage, everything. It's a massive team of people, really. Full of admiration for anybody who can put on a play and actually, present it in theatres and so forth. And it's all on show. And if it just goes wrong, people go, "Oh, who's to blame for that one?" Then you've got the critics who go, "Oh, I didn't like that, and I didn't like this."
Wow.
So, yes. There's some links on the in the box there to various things, I think, to do with our speakers this evening. Anyway, if anybody's interested, or perhaps we can put it up on our website in due course, hopefully as well. That's really interesting. Well, thank you. It's been fascinating learning all about Mary, or more about Mary and her legacy, and the imagery and the plays and various other things as well. There's an awful lot more there. I think we're going to have another speaker on Mary next year, actually. More to be announced later on, but I believe that we are having a speaker connected to Mary next year as well. It seems to be a subject we come back to, and I think it's a very, very important subject. And women need to have a much greater sort of focus in our history, and Mary is a prime example of a wonderful woman who doesn't get a very good press, really, unfortunately, for lots of different reasons. But okay, well, it's been very, very good. And thank you so much for our wonderful speakers. And thank you very, very much for the audience who's joined us and asked questions and listened very politely and so on. And we've still got most of you still here, actually. So thank you very much. And if anybody has any further questions, you can always email them to our secretary, William, who will pass them on to people as appropriate. So there's more to do, and more books to read, lots and lots of books to read. And if you wait long enough, Dr. Strong's monologue will come out. I'm sure I'll be buying it anyway. Maybe she'll sign a copy for me.
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's come and is viewing. Thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Bye.